Welcome to Season 6 of My Nostalgia Trip Games. We start with the 5th episode for the Sega Megadrive, or Genesis if you're an American, because the platform was skipped altogether in the 5th season. We're starting to lean more heavily on Megadrive games that I found out about through emulation, but since all that happened almost a quarter of a century ago, I'm not too bothered about it. And one of my absolute favorite Sega findings from that time is Sonic Spinball from 1993. Well, it's a pinball game starring Sonic the Hedgehog as the ball, but the way the game plays isn't quite as simple as a regular pinball is. It is a progressive pinball game with a plotline and structure similar to Sonic's classic platform adventures. Like most 90s pinball games, Sonic Spinball features 4 pinball tables, although to be more precise, they're large enough to be called pinball constructions. The first table already features 3 main areas. A minecart shaft that takes you to one of 3 emeralds you need to collect in order to get to the boss fight room of the level, which makes a total of 5 different areas in a single table construction. Sonic's ball form is mostly controlled with the flippers, but he can also latch onto platforms and levers and such, and you can make him walk and jump when he's not an active part of the pinball construction. Between the actual tables, Sonic gets to control a breakout-like pinball device in which the object is to free your friends from freezer pods guarded by Dr. Robotnik's miniature version. This is a bonus level, so it matters not if you don't manage to finish the level before wasting all your attempts. Though Sonic Spinball has received some criticism, mostly due to its lack of tables, I've always felt the criticism is a bit harsh considering the unique handling of the combination of genres here. To be honest though, the basic gameplay mechanics do feel a little lacking in some things. Perhaps it's due to a lack of proper pinball-like physics, but it is primarily a Sonic game, so I don't think you should even think of it as a proper pinball game. Oh, the lack of tables is not really the problem if you compare it to Pinball Dreams and Fantasies, but rather that you have no free access to any of the tables following the first one, as you have to finish them in order. For me, the only real problem is that you have to beat each table fully with a single life, instead of working your way through the construction's different missions in an organic manner like you do in other pinball games. Just getting to the second table is a major feat, which I've only managed to do twice, the second time for recording this footage here. Despite of its shortcomings though, Sonic Spinball is one of my favorite games in the franchise, and I come back to it more often than it probably even deserves. One of the most impressive games of all time on the Megadrive was Sega's own arcade conversion of Virtua Racing in 1992. And 2 years later, practically every Megadrive owner wished they had the Sega 32X console to get to play the enhanced deluxe version, which was closer to the original but had more content. It's a very arcadey sort of a Formula 1 racing game, but a very impressive one to be played on a 16-bit device thanks to an expensive special chip called the SVP that the cartridge needed to have in order to make it look and play this well. It has been said, no Super Nintendo game could outdo the 16-bit Sega in speed with Virtua Racing taking the lead. But you know, it's not always about the speed. Virtua Racing was one of the first games I ever bought from my own Megadrive almost 20 years ago now. If I remember correctly, it didn't cost me more than maybe 15 euros or so, considering the original retail price was, according to Wikipedia at least, $100 in the US and £70 in the UK, making it one of the initially most expensive games on the market. It was a bargain for sure. Having said that, I haven't really played Virtua Racing nearly as much as it probably deserves to be played. It is a marvelously smooth and fast racer, with the only limitations being the number of tracks and cars in it, making it easily dismissible. But it features different points of view, which was not a common thing back then, and for a full-filled 3D polygon game, to get the game to play as fast as this was magical. Of course, like the arcade original, the Mega Drive port has a practice mode and a 2-player mode, and just so that the few tracks will get a little bit more longevity to them, there's also a mirrored mode, which you can access after having completed the tracks in regular mode. For me, the 3 regular mode tracks are challenging enough to last for many years to come, unless I somehow decide to start playing Virtua Racing much more often from now on. If you've been watching all the episodes of my Nostalgia Trip games, you might remember from my DOS and Windows episodes that I'm a big fan of the Heroes of Might and Magic series. Well, the series has its origins in a game called King's Bounty, originally released in 1990 for Apple II, IBM PC and Commodore 64, but after having learned how to play it on the Commodore 64 maybe about 15 years ago, I bought myself the Sega Megadrive version quite by an accident, and have played that one more often since. In King's Bounty, you control a sole hero on horseback around the vast kingdom, building up your army, developing your selectable hero character, defeating enemies, expanding your area, and completing missions. It's a little bit slower paced than Heroes of Might and Magic, but you can clearly see the evolution starting from here. Since King's Bounty doesn't have the additional necessity of building towns and upgrading dwellings and all that, the only thing you really need to focus on from the beginning is to make money and build your army. The game gives you enough money in the beginning to buy all the army you can from your hometown, and you can go straight to find some enemies. The battling system is largely similar to the one in Heroes of Might and Magic, but simpler, square-based and less magic-oriented, at least in the first few battles. In fact, most of the gameplay is rather similar to Heroes of Might and Magic, it's just that King's Bounty is a downsized version of the same theme. The Mega Drive version of King's Bounty is a bit too slick and smooth if you're a fan of the DOS and C64 original, which I am, but the speed makes up for the lack of gravity, if you know what I'm saying. What really sets the Mega Drive version truly apart from the other versions is the real-time movement of your hero, as well as the movement of other creatures and armies on the map. I would suggest fans of the Heroes of Might and Magic games to try out this game on any platform you can find, for each version has its own flavor. King's Bounty was also released for the Commodore Amiga, FM Towns, and NEX PC-98 series. My decision to include this game on a Sega list is simply because there are too many other great games on the C64 I will never have the time to feature on my Nostalgia Trip games. I don't often play 3-dimensional snooker or billiards games, but Jimmy White's Whirlwind Snooker is one that I occasionally do. It was originally written by the legendary Archer McLean and released for the Commodore Amiga, Atari ST and PC in 1991, but the sole console port was made for the Sega Megadrive in 1994, somewhere around the same time the game was re-released on a budget label on home computers. I happened to buy this game early on in my Sega collecting days, and have made the habit of playing it once every couple of years. Whirlwind Snooker is among the first 3D billiards games, predated by Firebird's 3D Pool from 1989. But Archer McLean's coding made this one fast and smooth, and realistic enough to feel comfortable on a home computer. But it's the camera angles that gives Whirlwind Snooker the edge over other 3D billiards games from around that time, and really much of the technical stuff would have been impossible to achieve on any 8-bits, so the 8-bits were left out. The Sega port is not quite as smooth and fast as the original, but it does its job well enough. Of course, the one thing that the Sega version does that the Amiga and Atari versions do not is instant loading, which you get with the DOS version, but the Sega version has nicer sounds. The main attraction here is, of course, the traditional snooker game, which can be played against another human player or a computer of 4 possible difficulty levels. I was never able to beat even the easiest CPU opponent because I'm lousy at aiming with polygons. The other attraction here, once you get good enough, is the trick mode, which gives you the option to play various pre-built snooker tricks or build your very own snooker trick. I cannot say whether or not this works as intended, but it's an interesting idea for sure. Jimmy White's Whirlwind Snooker is one of the most highly regarded games of its kind from its time, and although it's not necessarily the most memorable Archer McLean game, the fact is that it still has the Archer McLean seal of quality and should be given some time, even if you're not particularly fond of these types of games. The last game for this season's first episode has a somewhat fleeting sense of nostalgia for me, because the Sega version of Rambo III is a game I remember playing only once back in the day on a real Sega console, and it didn't really impress me particularly much then. Of course, it could be that by then I was already familiar and comfortable with Ocean's version of Rambo 3 on the C64, which was released almost 2 years before the Sega version was released in Europe. But more than that, just based on the first few seconds, the gameplay here felt surprisingly close to Ocean's earlier game, Rambo First Blood Part 2. Sometime after emulation came along, I decided to revisit this game about 20 years ago or so, and was more impressed about the Sega game as I made progress. Sure, it's mostly the same tilted top-down maze-like action stuff, with you using various weapons such as a knife, a bow and arrows, claymore mines and a machine gun, but you do get the occasional scenes where Rambo is viewed from behind, with the aim to take down a larger enemy vessel such as a helicopter with your bow and arrows. Although this doesn't exactly compete with the variety of styles and sense of stealth and adventure that the Ocean version of Rambo 3 offers, the Sega game follows the movie plot rather well, and does its own thing very smoothly and to the point, with some nice cutscenes and all that jazz. It is a good option to Ocean's game, and it's definitely a lot better as a Rambo game than Sega's other Rambo game on the Master System. Certainly good enough that I had to get it in my collection, and has become one of my regular Mega Drive nostalgia trip games.